Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Laura Henriksen. I'm the Director of Learning and Community Engagement at the Poetry Project. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all and an honor to welcome tonight's readers, Marie Buck and Serena Devi, as well as our guest introducer Farnoosh Fathi, who's been working with Serena this season in the Poetry Project's Emerge Surface B Fellowship Program. Before I turn it over to them, I just have a few reminders and updates. Tonight's moderator, the wonderful Corey Hutchinson, is adding a link to the chat now with some helpful Zoom tips and best practices. Please note that we are recording tonight's event. You are welcome to have your cameras on or off as you prefer, but just keep in mind that if you have your camera on, it's possible your little tile will end up included in the archived video. I also want to note it's possible to access a live transcript of tonight's event by clicking that little red live link in the top left corner and selecting View Stream, which will open the transcript in another browser window. If you have any questions or run into any difficulties, please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone with staff after their name, and we'll be glad to help. So too, and crucially, if you experience or notice any maliciousness in the chat, please reach out to anyone on staff so that we can work to get that resolved right away. We are grateful to you for joining us in the ongoing effort to build and nurture safer spaces where we can listen and learn together. Corey is now adding to the chat a link to our Statement of Safer Spaces. Whenever we gather, sharing our time, even if not our physical space, we remain committed to building with you all an environment that challenges and resists ongoing structures of hierarchy and harm. If this event were taking place in our usual venue, we would be gathered together now in St. Mark's Church in the Bowery, where we have hosted events for more than 50 years. St. Mark's Church was built over the site where Peter Stuyvesant constructed his family chapel in 1660. Stuyvesant enslaved 40 people, and in his time as Director General of New Netherlands, increased the population of enslaved Africans in the colony, whose stolen lives and labor were used to construct the buildings and streets on this stolen land. St. Mark's Church is located on the unceded homeland of the Lenape people, Lenape-Hoking. I am speaking to you tonight from what is called Sunset Park in Brooklyn, which is the unceded homeland of the Canarsie, a Munsee-speaking band of Lenape people, a neighborhood whose waterfront was redlined in the 1930s, a waterfront that is now the site of Municipal Detention Center, a federal prison where 1,600 people are currently experiencing incarceration. As we gather across various neighborhoods and states, it gives me occasion to remember that it's not just some of the land that was stolen or some of the land that needs to be returned, but all of it. It reminds me too that to return the land is not a matter of transferring capitalist ownership, but as many Indigenous thinkers have taught us, a radical rethinking of ownership and belonging, centering Indigenous autonomy and active relationality and responsibility. To reiterate Gloria Anzaldua's assertion, this land was Lenape-Hoking always, and is, and will be again. Corey is putting a link to a map in the chat now, not to endorse it as complete, but to invite you to join us in learning continually about the land we occupy, its history and ties, as a path towards deeper accountability. Thank you so much for reflecting on this with me. I'm just so honored and pleased to turn it over now to Farnoosh to introduce Serena.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you, Corey, James, Roberto. Really grateful to be here. And I'll just start. I feel really lucky to have been able to work with Serena Devi, whose poems and project for the ESB Fellowship have thrilled me. She's working on a speculative poetry chapbook about the imminent ending of the world that never comes. It's called Rapture from Every Angle, and it imagines how a generation raised expecting doomsday would react to receiving suddenly in its stead a promising, viable world. We are guided to this precipice by her protagonist, Hells, who confronts the terror of her own optimism, as well as the responsibilities of taking one's place in this new world, one in which the libertine-tude she cultivated as an adolescent now seems ill-fitting. From pessimistic to pessimistic, or eschatological mystic all along. She was like Kali, the real housewife of infinite universes. Devi's Hells reminds me of the Swiss explorer turned cross-dressing debauched Sufi in Algeria, Isabella Eberhardt. Had Eberhardt survived the flood in which she and nearly all her writing perished at 27, and had continued instead to reinvent herself through adulthood today. Devi's poems surge with a similar irreverent devotion in their spiritual abandon and mental travel. She has a gift for constellating and inhabiting forms and the social, virtual, and interior birth cries and death throes inside them. Through cowboy graffiti, wiretap transcriptions, somatic diaries, and a revolutionary pop song that ends with the chorus, 22 is a great age to die for a cause. 22 is a great age to die for a cause. 22 is a great age to die for a cause. She transmedially invokes both the diffuse, death-sustained chaos and protean fecundity of the world she's building from within without. And it's as tender, daring, and surprising a world as I could ask for right now. And I'm so excited that she will read now from it to you. Please welcome Serena Devi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Farnoosh, for that lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be here, and as much as I would love to be able to do this in person, I think it's really great that we're having a virtual event, so people I know who don't necessarily live in New York can come and see too. So thank you to everyone who's tuning in, regardless of where you're watching. Oh, and also, if you haven't gotten Unsolved Mysteries yet, I recently received this in the mail, and it's a wonderful read, so highly recommend. And I'm just so honored to be opening for Marie. Farnoosh already kind of explained the premise of my project, but I'm going to read, it's not really a poem, it's more like a document from the beginning. It's like a doomsday prepper blogger transcript, but like constructed, obviously, it's fictional. And I just feel like it kind of helps place what exactly I'm working with here in terms of like plot. So this is that. They laughed at Noah until it started to rain. This is another didactic dispatch as we count down to the adrenochrome sunrise. It's challenging days ahead. Myself, I've got to say I'm not shocked, but I had a friend on the inside. As for the rest of you, maybe this is your first time. It doesn't matter. This is what we call shit hitting the fan. Hell, the end's been happening. It's only now that you know. The powers that be don't have your back. Fear not, folks. I've thought a lot about the end, let me tell you. It happens in a matter of hours. To be solitary is to be debtless. Ask yourself, do you know how disaster unfolds? Do you know how people will react? Do you know how you're gonna react? Everybody's trying to fit through the same window at once, and we're at the mercy of the most desperate persons around us starting now. You've got to scheme with discretion. Bugging out doesn't work if there's nowhere to bug out to. You're better off staying in place. Your pantry had better be deep and full. That's the first thing people will miss and the first thing they'll wish they had more of. But do not wait. You do a little bit over time, build infrastructure, tend to it. Most people don't think about the grid, how easy it comes down. Despair is next to death. Don't answer the phone, don't answer the door, don't fill out any surveys. Maybe you saw this coming, but didn't think it'd happen so soon. Maybe you're frightened by how quickly you accepted it, but that's how you get it down to a science. Risk evaluation is key. Go through your day normally, count your steps, and pat your pockets. What is it that you need? Liquidate whatever isn't necessary. Consolidate, prioritize, trim the fat. The things you'll need the most will be the easiest to forget now. Raw honey, bulk matches, freeze-dried asparagus, duct tape, dog food, bleach, jute cords, vegetable oil candles, zip ties, hydrogen peroxide, DEET, salt, ammunition, heirloom seeds, batteries, and live food. Next week, I'll tell you all about rabbits. Signing off till sunrise. And this, I guess, is the first actual poem from the collection I'll be reading, and it's called City Limits. There in the distance, and distant like a green ribbon, half fist upon half fist enclosing, this shallow crater I drag my feet against. Once I knew this earth by smell, till I grew careful to mind what I brought home beneath my nails. It's a shame, but not enough to quite stir an open palm of a girl, a thoughtless traipse, my wholeness a sigh through these long-suffering branches that waver to hold, then give. I measure my steps in tiny mercies such as these, an inventory of the unbothered, knowing I'm the only thing fretting over the yet to come. Dumb green and gold, couldn't give a fuck, but here I go, on my kill streak through this afternoon, preciously numbered, I'm certain. And if they'd never told us, here I'd be, pocketing my numbness, braced half-heartedly from silence, the worst thing in the world right now, it turns out. Yes, worse even than what's waiting back on the East End, calamity in search of a vessel, all the spillover palpable all the time. They'll drown by their own hands, floods for the flooded and plagues for the plagued. I move towards my dust, come to know it readily. I won't flinch, not like them. This one is called Bedroom Scene. Once in the before times, I got hurt by someone underfed and never thought I'd live through the spring. In those same before times, we were living parallel. If you would just pay attention, all at once or not at all, I always end up on my back, reading the stupidest books. But either way, I'm writing just to say, in the now, find me, half living like a tragic royal, waiting to get found by my own 13th pillar. Worship is a pathetic centerpiece, nothing out of the ordinary. My mother smashing plates in the kitchen, father shaking me by the shoulders, brother punching holes in the hallway. Pleasure unbounded by obligation, no meaning lent to the pursuit thereof. Hysteria made other people's business. But paganism, that's differently entirely. Listening and hearing only yourself. This is called Pleasure Math. Flame and stone, yours and mine. Is this making love, that craft you spoke of, sat on the floor of our small, wretched kingdom? Stay in prayer, a simple get. The planes all drop from the sky at once. Your goods remain perishable. No more hurrying up just because you're in trouble. Always craving liquor, bright like blood. You and your sick, piggish sister. Gold and diamond, cash in and collect. This is called News Dispatch. Children's suicidal ideation takes on a new urgency. Experts say it will only get worse. I want to be torn apart by wolves, says one area high schooler, or something spectacular like that. This is called Joan's Prayer. I want to ravage while there's still stuff left to break. I'm writing bloody manifestos in my sleep. Behind my eyelids, it verges on lust. I don't want serenity, I want clarity. Is real love ever vicious and unkind? Isn't motherhood a tearing motion? To be good is to forget. To be good is to forget. To be good is to forget, of course. But constantly, I'm seized by tenderness so heavy it immobilizes me and blacks my vision. I don't need any more signs. I could suffer, at least for something known. Show me the pyre, I will fall to my knees. You say I need to do the hard thing. Tell me what it is. I'd sooner labor with my hands than split open again. Make me an instrument or a cup or a blade, righteous and lethal. I feel when you're watching. How long have you been with me? Well, something died inside me and my body ate it up. I'm sorry, sister, but now I see where I went wrong. Hear my prayer. I'm trying to understand how this drive is neither sacred nor profane, neither efficient nor tasteful. Reveal the means and I'll bring my end. Ransack all the way through with bated breath, amen. Death drive. Because you burn money candles, because you were named after an aunt, a keeper, a legendary beauty, some dumb broad, because you had to be there, because the sky was on fire, because there was nowhere else to be, no other way, because the skyline quieted itself, dimming gradually, because time was unfurling and the factories were shutting down in slow motion. Because in case you haven't noticed, the end is nigh, because somebody couldn't keep their lid shut, because something somewhere said so, and nobody moved to argue, and the bright ideas ran dry. Because maybe it's for the best, because arguing with fate is for losers. It's undignified to flail. Apology. It was just me in the way, thick and obstinate, a dumb kicked animal. I'm sorry to say, had you been less anti-work and I less anti-school, perhaps we could have been good for one another. Knowing the rules of language, the way soap is supposed to smell, and all according little laws, I thought I knew this house too. And given to God, that stick dragged across the floor, heavy breathing in its every scrape. You could have swung and I would have left it. This is called Orgy the Morning After. For a long while, nothing was everything, and each new void stayed unfilled. When the people woke up to find the most vital bag fumbled, day in and day out, nothing was everything. Bless the rain and bless the crops, take stock of glories, gather all small things, choke the breath out of them. All the women were suddenly so tolerant. You'd think there had never been a song so bottomed out but soaring. I think I know this one. In this state, we all might as well. Something special happened. So special, it caved in on itself and became unremarkable entirely. The song was coming from nowhere specific, and in fierce spirits, even staring at the wall became a righteous act. Dollar, 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 dime, dime, dime. Every forever, again and again, each time no duller than the last, filled to the brim, withering and loving it. They'd spend months talking about this phenomenon where everybody left their doors flung open for their pets, maybe for a better chance to escape, but likely just so they could die under the sun. Only some knew to come back. It was okay though. Now there was eternity to chase, infinity to capture, and to hunt was to fuck, was to love, was to breed. And even fighting grasps felt reverent. This is called feeling unrestful. The wanting, the having, missionary sex, the fall of empire. This seemed austere and unreachable before. The man-made, the excellent. It wasn't pretty, but every day I'm shocked by what still shocks me. I am unknown, I am safe. Thank you. This is called Wiretap, and it's sort of inspired by transcriptions. So just think of it as a sort of like redacted transcription of a wiretapped household. Getting really into these indistinct rituals, it's nothing of the sort, not a clue, but you don't have to know much to know. If you'd go to war for this country, die in a desert for this gay ass failed state, indistinct, you can't imagine, cannot fathom. What and what about? A feeling this could all come down. What's this and where did you find it? Wanting more than we could give. Picked it up to bring something. Indistinct, empty hands always. A strange place, but still. Well, I never said that. I never said that. And even if it were true, the next best thing, I guess, is indistinct disarray, dissipate. Did you want more of this? Does anybody want more? Toss that back, watch the candle, block it all out. In my mind, I saw the words, and in the moment, it all made sense. It goes that way, put it out. Doesn't it? Put it out. I get the feeling there's someone here who knew better. What did I tell you? Indistinct, never wrong. Found you half dead in the bathroom and laughed. I was better until that night. I saw, thought. Once you give me a break, I'll never go back. Indistinct whatever, if you even thought to ask. This is called Confession. He said, and I quote, "They were all fatigued." This Robin Hood shit got me rock hard for a sec, but now I'm burned. Already I'm out here with my feeling parts exposed, but fatigue is a sickness first and foremost of the mind. I would let it all fly, but I always knew who'd take the fall. Maybe when I knelt, I was touched by a bad hand, but shit, it felt promised enough to me. And I felt saved. Sometimes I wish I was dead in the dirt on schedule. Anyhow, here comes the funny part. 7 dead, pennies. Who runs towards the boom? We cut the hole this time. We did the fucking. Like rich girl pussy, it sprays gold coins. It was wicked, so what? See how you take it when your coolest friend blows himself to pieces. This is called Final Vision. Call your birds, be soft out loud. In your hand is the capacity to tremendously wound, nurture and defer at every turn. The power to make soft, never abuse. Be a good girl, tend gardens, kiss wrists. The world is lighter than you know, a surprise. Do not miss what you left behind, a vapor. Learn from scattered blisses. Do not think quickly. Luxury is ephemeral, poverty is a wet ditch. Real virtue makes one barren. Call your birds. Read the news if you must, but call your birds. This is called Finn. It's supposed to be tentatively the last poem in the collection, but it doesn't really have a title beyond, indicating that it's the last poem. Let me show you how good I can be, indoctrinated one way or the other. The father in me wants to scam this good-for-nothing state for all it's worth, suck the pus out of this bloated cadaver. The mother in me wants to share the loot. That's all I have for tonight. Thank you all so much. And thank you to the Poetry Project and Laura and everybody on staff for all your support and all your tech support. And I'm so excited to hear Marie read. Thank you all.
Serena, that was so good. I was completely enthralled. The world that you've made or that you are making is so vast and it's so specific and precise at the same time. Thank you so much. I love that. And Farnoosh, your introduction was just beautiful. Thank you both. I'm really honored now to introduce Marie. There's this Fanny Howe poem that begins, "I won't be able to write from the grave, so let me tell you what I love." And then it lists pleasures, types of food, friends in your bed, songs and poems. It's a little archive that, in being partial, is more complete than so many other records of times on Earth. But then, of course, the terrible problem is that there are so many who do not leave poems chronicling their loves before they go, either because they didn't write them or because they weren't heard. And how do we remember them? When memory fails, when the vacuum consumes the fragments that remain, when only the bad parts are left, quote, the violent deaths of mostly working class people, often living in rural places, whose lives would not be otherwise well documented, unquote. How do we honor those dead? This, I think, is one of the central questions of Marie Buck's Unsolved Mysteries, which turns to the eponymous TV series about questions that remain without answers, to think about what it means to live at all, which necessarily includes living with the dead. Replacing the normative speculation of the show, where the husband who killed you becomes the keeper of your story, where the town that judged you continues judging you in death, Buck imagines possible counter-histories, escapes to New York, joy and fantasy tabletop role-playing games. They approach the void of forgotten details with the vastness of possible things. Quote, her crush and her sensation of eating an ice cream, her pencil on the page, and also the scent of her shampoo, grass stains on her jeans, the texture of a burger as she bites it, and heat warping the air above the grill, every bit of her life, end quote. A very good way to keep the dead close is to keep telling stories about them. A very good thing to do before you die is to write a poem that is full of things that give you pleasure. Another project of Unsolved Mysteries, so that the piles you slept in, the shows you cried watching, the way you spoke with your lovers and the way your lovers spoke with you can echo out into the haunted space between fantasy and memory, the place we get to live until we die. It's such an honor to turn it over now to Marie.
And thank you so much, Laura. Thank you for that introduction. And it's like such a pleasure to read for the project and such a pleasure to read with Serena. Okay, let's see. Yeah, so like Laura said, I'm gonna read some poems from Unsolved Mysteries, which came out from Roof a few months ago. Okay, so this first poem is called The Dead. All we're going to do after the revolution is document the lives of the dead. Not the dead we already know about, but the dead we don't know about. We're going to take Jeff Bezos' money, and we're going to document ourselves and our pets, all our affections, our quotidian habits. We're going to document street cats that we didn't take in because we already had pets. We're going to document, on behalf of our pets, all the toys that our pets liked and accidentally destroyed. And maybe socialism will unveil something. Maybe Jeff Bezos' money will mingle with his blood and create an effect. Maybe socialism will undo our deadness so that we might animate our archives and interact as the things we left behind. Me, for instance, as a Katamari ball of poems, but mostly emails facilitating the publication of academic articles, i.e. my day job, of bills paid, of bizarrely intimate texts with people met online, of graduate school papers about poetry I no longer like, of an embarrassing and neurotic Google history that wonders at various ages about the health of my bowels, the relative attractiveness of my genitals, the addictions of family and friends, about how to find memes that I can no longer find, about how Pasolini was killed, about the etiquette for sending sympathy notes. So that is the body that would get picked back up. And it could go around and find the others, the archives of my friends and lovers and pets from across time. I would find my childhood dogs, I would pet them. I would find the goldfish that got trapped at the top of the fish tank and cooked under the light. And when I had gotten used to things a bit and was ready, I would find my loves across time, here in the form of animated G-chats. I'd suck on the shoulders of the G-chats. I'd be really toppy with them. I'd leave them for my friends, and my friends and I would tease each other about our archive bodies, about the things we'd Googled, the way our texts fit together to create new versions of our mouths. Let's take Jeff Bezos' money and use it to live forever. This poem is called I Start Watching Unsolved Mysteries. If you don't know it, it's a TV show from the late 80s and early 90s, and on up into the aughts apparently, though I haven't seen those episodes. It's about various eerie phenomena, unexplained deaths, paranormal activity, lost loves, hidden treasures, lost heirs, UFOs, missing persons, etc. The categories, which at one point in the opening credits are listed across the screen in a style that makes them look like they're receding into the depths of the computer, are loose and vary from week to week. If you remember the show, you probably remember the unexplained death segments, which mostly recount people going about their daily routines and then disappearing or turning up murdered. It is often, but not always, a serialized documentary about the violent deaths of mostly working class people, often living in rural places, whose lives would not otherwise be well documented. And like with all of us, their lives and deaths might have been otherwise. And this one is called Hot Jock Shot Wad from Wisconsin, 1185, Saturday the 3rd. And it's one of the poems that's about one of the figures documented in Unsolved Mysteries. In 1985, Dexter Stefanik, a 78-year-old man, is killed while traveling from Oregon to Wisconsin. It's winter. He chooses to save time by stopping at rest stops to sleep. Hot Jock Shot Wad from Wisconsin, 1185, Saturday the 3rd, is written on the rest stop bathroom wall. A cryptic phrase, maybe a clue. Police discover it months after they discover Dexter Stefanik's car burning. Just after his body is discovered at a county dump, his shoes hanging out of a pile of garbage. His legs, his body, hidden frozen within the pile. According to the internet and also to the office of Orrin Hatch, who was mocked online for using the phrase publicly in August 2017, shot your wad comes from the Civil War era and refers to shooting a plug of cloth rather than a bullet from a musket, i.e. an ineffective shot, a shot where you fucked up and wasted it. But we all know that if you write on a bathroom wall that somebody has shot their wad, you're probably referring to coming. Maybe to masturbation rather than to sex, but the musket is definitely a dick. There's even more mystery though. The dates are wrong. Dexter Stefanik's car was found burning on November 19th, 1985, not November 3rd. November 3rd then must have marked a parallel, a time split. A hot jock from Wisconsin shot his wad in the bathroom stall, possibly into the mouth of another man, possibly into the hand of another man, possibly into their own hand, wishing for a different hand, a hand that wasn't theirs and that was therefore less predictable, and that would have taken away the burden of being in control of each motion, of getting oneself to come as opposed to being made to come. Being made to come is not always better, but in a bathroom stall in Montana in the winter, I think it is better. In this scenario, someone refers to himself as hot jock, which seems surprising. Perhaps this was intended as a seed. Suggest on a bathroom wall that there is sometimes a hot jock there, and then perhaps there will be. Orrin Hatch was mocked for saying that other Republicans had shot their wad with regard to a series of defeated healthcare bills. The healthcare bills sought to make healthcare even shittier, to make life and the relationship to one's body even more difficult, so that it would be less and less likely that one could sadly or agitatedly or happily or thoughtlessly shoot one's wad in a restroom stall, and more likely that one would, like Dexter Stefanik, be kidnapped and shot twice and left at an icy garbage dump. In this world, the world in which we lose healthcare and other services even more quickly than we are, it is definitely more likely your car will be set on fire, your foot will be spotted sticking out from under an old couch, your body will no longer be animated. A friend got caught by a cop writing "Bernie would have won" in a rest stop bathroom. That is, casting a spell. That world would be a different world. There are many possible worlds, some better, some worse than that phrase would suggest. In one world, everyone is sad about the deaths of their loved ones, but cross-country trips do not exist, Montana does not exist, springtime does not exist. In this world, you don't have to jerk yourself off, but you're not jerked off by anyone else either. You can touch your dick yourself, or you can thrust it into the world, and the world manifests not as loose air, but as a sloppy wet mouth, a rectum, spit-covered labial folds, a spongy warm pocket, a small calloused hand. You thrust into the world, you the hot jock, and you shoot your wad. My current favorite memory to shoot my wad to is: a man pulls out to avoid coming, to keep lasting and make a game of it, but cannot help but come accidentally, sitting in front of me with his legs folded underneath him, thighs shaking, spurting into a condom without touching himself or me. Just a dick, not being touched, no longer inside of anything, quivering and filling a condom head. This man was definitely not Dexter Stefanik, since Dexter Stefanik is dead. But this man came into the ether, suggesting the possibility of a world in which Dexter Stefanik would never have died. The theory of the homunculus, a 16th century speculation about how a fetus came to be, suggested that cum was composed of tiny men, tiny little humans. So in shooting our hot wads, we're shooting out people. Little men who might escape the condom, not to cream on a hand or in an ass, but instead to populate the world, to fill it with tiny helper elves who would have, as Dexter Stefanik shot his wad in the rest station bathroom, left the restroom, stopped the killer, a man of at least 6 feet with a pale complexion who was later seen pulling up behind Stefanik's empty car. The homunculi might have restrained the killer, whispering warnings into his ears, and when he did not heed these warnings, chomped into his flesh repeatedly until he melted into the snow and dissolved into the bellies of the homunculi, strengthening them for more good deeds. In this world, Dexter Stefanik lives another couple years, shooting wads where he likes, quivering and coming, driving across the isolated stretch from Oregon to Wisconsin over and over again. And this poem is called Let's Memorialize the Dead Even More. Leftists die and people post so-and-so presente on Facebook. The internet right at this moment tells me that presente means that the person is present. You're here with us, you are not forgotten, we continue the struggle in your name. This is the opposite of what I had imagined it to mean. Not knowing Spanish and not looking it up for years, I had imagined it to mean something more like, I present this person to you, and I can present them because they're dead and therefore finished. The real version is much better, but also sadder. I watched United in Anger, a documentary about ACT UP, and in it, beautiful people in their cute 80s clothes go to the AIDS quilt demonstration for World AIDS Day, and then stage a separate protest, the protest that David Wojnarowicz suggests in Close to the Knives. They throw their lovers' ashes onto the White House lawn. In How to Survive a Plague, the other ACT UP documentary, you just see little bursts of ashes cloud as people throw their lovers' ashes over the fence. But in United in Anger, you see a slightly different set of footage. Here you see people open the vessels they are using to carry the ashes and show the contents to the camera. And the ashes seem thicker, there are maybe bits of bone. The remains look more like remains when they are in vessels than they do when they are clouds dissipating into the air. It feels like the time I watched Dan Brackage's autopsy movie, the act of seeing with one's own eyes, curled up on a couch with friends. And I saw the scalp pulled back to reveal that the brain is green, and I could not forget it. I find it reassuring to think that the ashes aren't really the only remainder. There must be many pictures, maybe some video. The ashes in the boxes look like the lung that is crushed in a doctor's hand in the documentary Harlan County, USA. Harlan County, USA documents a miners' strike in the early 70s. In the segment on Black Lung, a doctor, or perhaps a union man, holds something black and small and crumbly. It looks like paper in his hand. And closing his hand, he lets it crumble and disintegrate into something even more like old brittle paper. The bits of lung fall through his fingers to the floor. Later in the movie, a woman stands before a crowd at a solidarity demo for the miners, and while she's not a miner, she's as close to a miner as you could get, she says, through her son, her father, her husband having been miners. She was there in the 30s for bloody Harlan County. She tells the crowd they have nothing to lose but their chains. She sings the song she wrote back in the 30s, Which Side Are You On? Hey, this woman is the woman who wrote Which Side Are You On? Harlan County is an observational documentary that insists on giving you no context for anything, so I look her up. Her name was Florence Reese. Her husband was Sam Reese. They were strike leaders and their home was broken into and they were terrorized by the mining company and the law. I have never heard her or his name before, despite that I once wrote a dissertation that was largely about the history of social movements. A lover tells me about reading Anna Karenina. Are you reading it because Tolstoy was an anarchist, I ask? I mean, that's related, he says, but I just don't want to not have read it. I tell him that's how I feel about Moby Dick. If I don't read it, it will never have entered my brain, and I'll die without having read it. My brain will go green without Moby Dick or Anna Karenina in it. Though unless you have an autopsy, maybe your brain won't ever have the chance to be exposed to air and become green instead of pink. What color is it when dead but not exposed to air? I'm going to assume gray. Your gray brain would never have registered Anna Karenina or Moby Dick, and it would not matter at all. The brain winds up gray either way, and in that state cannot articulate what it once thought of Moby Dick or Anna Karenina. It is very unlikely anyone will even ever wonder if you read Anna Karenina. My lover, who is not available to me and with whom I am not in love, tells me about the plot. The plot mostly seems to involve people falling in love with people who are not available to them and being overwhelmed by sadness. For reasons that are unclear to me, my conversations with this lover tend to circle back to work, exes, and prior sex we've had. His ex, he reveals, makes labor documentaries. I like that the lung in Harlan County and the ashes in United in Anger live on in the documentaries. And I wonder what it would mean if they had lived on in the footage, but the documentaries had never been completed, and the footage had sat in a box in a room for many years, until it too began to deteriorate, much like the lung. So that, say, the lung was lost to history, except for its documentation on a strip of film. And then that strip of film also crumbled like a lung. But this crumbling of the film strip was itself recorded, so that instead of watching footage of the lung crumbling in someone's hand, we would watch footage of a lung crumbling in someone's hand, itself being crumbled in someone's hand. Sex fluids stain the comforter and look like dried salt. Blood dries on a condom in a little silver trash can. And now my pink brain creates fantasies as I rest. In the fantasies, I read a book called Moby Dick. When I awake, I want to write down the new Moby Dick. In the new Moby Dick, someone is dying of black lung while I'm protesting outside, not dying of anything. Inside, people are very cold, while outside I too am cold, but not nearly as cold. Diana is there and crying a bit. I make a video to capture the sound of the protest. This does not document anything. And the hardware that creates the internet will rot the way that people are left to rot. I will only call it rotting if it could be made better, but isn't. In the dream, I go home and am fucked by someone who does not discursively describe the fucking as it's happening, as the other lover, the one who's reading Anna Karenina, tends to do. It is unclear if dirty talk is a kind of documenting. There's no document produced. But saying that you're fucking someone as you're fucking them, and verbally chronicling wetness, heat, rigidity, the swelling of a clit, seems better than to not. And so in this dream, you arrive back from the protest. You're being fucked and only the coming is verbally chronicled. The rest of it dissolves more quickly than speech. In the dream, your brain turns gray, but in real life, it is full of blood. So this poem is called Ars Poetica. Maybe poems have always been about remembering, and for some reason I was fighting it. Like I didn't want to care about remembering things. I mean, no one wants to read something about how one person's life is so precious, but I do think I thought poems could be about the world and therefore not about me. And you know, I still want that, more of the world, less me, but also kind of all me here, to haunt you and live in this book after I die, roaming the earth and getting pulped and roaming some more. David Berman, one of the first poets I loved, died last week, and I keep reading Self-Portrait at 28 over and over again. I wish I could write this poem as a David Berman ripoff, but I can't quite get in the mode. I can only note that I first read that poem when I was 21, and now I'm so much older. Now I'm 37, and to think the word Self-Portrait at 28 is something different than what it once was. I didn't read that poem when I was 28, but I'm certain there was a moment when we all reenacted the ending, when my voice was what filled my cat's thoughts, as Berman's speaker's voice fills his dog's thoughts in the poem. Quoting Berman, "You see, his mind can only hold one thought at a time. And when he looks up and cocks his head, for a single moment, my voice is everything." Self-Portrait at 28. The trick is that we get Berman's portrait through himself seeing his dog, seeing him, and telling it to us for a single moment. There are some things poetry is ill-suited for, but it's extremely good at describing the single moment. I guess that poetry can't help but be precious then, and also that it's always a metonym. Let's get at this moment and use it as a thumbnail for all the other moments. The first lines of that poem are, "I know it's a bad title, but I'm giving it to myself as a gift." I remember first hearing the term Ars Poetica in poetry class, College of Charleston, circa 2002, and thinking that Ars Poeticas seemed like the worst because they suggested that there was nothing to write about. If we're making poems about poems instead of poems about the world, and the world isn't worthy of note, and there's no experience of a thing to point to, then why stay alive? Whereas now I'd like art to consume as much of life as possible. If art is the Katamari ball and life is all the objects in the world, the objects that have not yet been subsumed into the Katamari ball are always too many and make me anxious. Writing about memory instead of about the world makes me scared. Who will read this poem, I think? I mean, who are the people I don't think of as the readers for it, but who might nonetheless see it? But I'm going to write this here. Let's make it performative, a speech act. If you're reading this and I should forgive something you've done, I forgive it. If you're reading this and I should ask your forgiveness, I'm asking it now. I take a walk with a lover. We get bagels. We take them to Grand Army Plaza. We sit on a bench. I don't spill anything on myself. He tells me about Mormonism and I have nothing to offer since he knows everything about Catholicism. I say that maybe we're missing something with confession. Now people go to therapy, but therapy doesn't involve speech acts. My therapist can help me, but she can't forgive me. Forgiveness is pretty social. I mean, sin exists. There's that Flannery O'Connor story in which a very young boy has barely left his house, and his grandfather, who is his caregiver, has also barely left the house. The grandfather's been to Atlanta once and is afraid of it. They're in rural Georgia. The grandfather agrees to catch the train with the boy and take him to Atlanta for the day. The grandfather doesn't know how to do a lot of things outside of his normal routine, so he's scared. When they're in Atlanta, very much a big frightening city, they get lost. The young boy accidentally knocks someone over, if I'm remembering it correctly, and suddenly people are yelling at him, demanding he pay money, threatening to throw him in jail, etc. The boy is terrified. The grandfather, who had been distracted by something else and so had been walking a little bit behind, sees this happening and pretends he doesn't know the boy, even when the boy points at him and appeals to him. The grandfather, who does not have any money, walks away, leaving the boy alone with people yelling at him that he must pay. The grandfather eventually finds the boy again. He feels regret after, but that doesn't change it. And O'Connor is so dark and brutal and good. It's like she's taunting us, daring us into Catholicism. You think sin doesn't exist? Let me show you something horrific. There's no way that this is not sin. And we nod in horror. Men leave their wives for younger women all the time, sometimes leaving their kids as well, even in commie circles. And every time I definitely think this is a sin. When I left a partner, my first therapist afterward asked me if I missed my partner. And when I said yes, she said, well, he bore witness to your existence for 5 years, which was true. But she also said that as though it were explanatory. The next time I fall in love, the person I'm in love with will never remember how the cats used to crawl into a hole in the box spring of our old bed, for instance, and sleep in the box spring so that if you couldn't find them, you'd eventually look under the bed for 2 weighty pockets of fabric hanging down lower than the rest. And you'd poke the fabric and find their soft, heavy bodies, and they'd mew and stir as you woke them. And when I go out now with people my own age, I think, wow, you've lived like a whole life already. It's not like you're ever going to be able to explain it all to me. James Baldwin just kills off Rufus, the character the narrative has thus far followed, a third of the way through another country, which is a weird, brutal move you can't do in poetry either. You have to have the narrative to build the protagonist. In poetry, we're ready for one moment to be special and unlike the next. In fiction, we want to believe the continuity of the narrative. That's the premise for narrative working. But it doesn't occur to us that the narrative can still continue without the protagonist, i.e., there's a social world. For a single moment, your voice is everything to someone somewhere, but that's why it's just a single moment. I'm eating my bagel at Grand Army Plaza. There should be more of a concept of sin in the world, we say. We should just get what sin is right. When do you reach the age of accountability in Mormon theology? 8. When do you reach it in Catholic theology? 7. My lover is 9 years younger than me, so I've had 10 years more sinning than he has in total. Part of me doesn't doubt that the sins last longer than the rest of it. If, for instance, Flannery O'Connor created a story about a grandfather who sinned by forsaking his grandson, that grandfather's sin lives longer and wider than, say, the tumbling buffalo that David Wojnarowicz dreams, since the tumbling buffalo involves no sin. And since, because it involves no sin, in or out of the frame of the dream, We want to hold it in our brains as long as we can. Look, this buffalo has survived since the 80s, penetrated out of its dream world and off of Wanarovich's lips and onto a tape diary, from the tape diary into a paperback book printed in many thousands of copies, and from that book into my brain, and from my brain into this poem to do battle with the awful grandfather in the Flannery O'Connor story. But God, all you feel when you read the O'Connor story is a pit of sickness in your stomach. What if you woke up so guilty? What if you've been so guilty and it wasn't justified and the shame of it just hung there? What if sin is less ephemeral than all the rest of it? I guess that must be how someone came up with the concept of hell, which certainly must have predated heaven. I tell my lover that I want him to make me Mormon, and he replies that he never got to the level at which you can do that, but his brothers did. Anything that made me Mormon would also just be a speech act upon speech act, all to apologize. I watch Fleabag, a show about guilt, and I cry more than other people seem to have cried while watching it. Also, the hot priest, the confessional. I feel like Twitter missed that what's actually hot about the hot priest is the promise of forgiveness. The metaphor is that sexuality holds out a promise of forgiveness, or of not in fact needing it. I'm supposed to need forgiveness for this sex sin, but since the rubric that dictates that is bullshit, in fact, perhaps I don't need forgiveness at all. And what caused the question is when our main character pursues the hot priest, someone who can forgive with a speech act, and winds up on her knees in a confessional booth. And the promise of forgiveness is perhaps the promise of being able to love your lover rather than fucking and simultaneously spiking the camera. That is, turning to it and looking at the viewer when previously you have not looked at the viewer to comment on the fucking. A move that's better than some moves and worse than others, and that felt overly familiar to me as I watched the show. Fleabag takes the camera spike trope from The Office and subsequently so many other shows. Main characters turn to face the camera and address the camera cleverly and sarcastically to comment on the antics of everyone around them, of the world they're living in, and show it for what it is. Spiking the camera is about depression. Maybe in the British Office, the depressive camera spike is a welcome critique of office culture. Our straight man looks to us, the viewers, framed as a documentary crew, instead of those around him. Don't we all feel like this in the office? Wouldn't we all like someone who is not crazy to talk to, someone to share a glance with? Maybe in the American office, more depressingly, it's a very unself-conscious sort of generalized depression. Humor equals constant light mockery and distance from one's surroundings. It's almost like that bit in Mark Fisher, where we're all imagining a big other. We think someone likes things as they are, when in fact no one does. But we constantly project onto our environment some sort of culture that everyone consents to and likes except for ourselves. And then derisiveness is the only mode that we can operate in. And so we get Stephen Colbert and every other Riot news show that is like it too, where the world is the office. We're all being winked at by the smartest person on the sitcom, and we get him and he gets us and everyone else just doesn't get it. Something about it feels very late 90s, aughts, pre-Occupy, when finally, like Fisher predicted, a sort of veil lifted in political life, and many of us saw each other there, hating the same things, and stopped looking only to the imagined viewer and started looking to each other. But Fleabag is different from The Office. It posits spiking the camera not as a clever default from a witty protagonist, but as a depressive symptom. Being too clever for everything around you, wanting to have a non-existent viewer who looks at the world and helps you disengage from it through your shared cleverness. Which makes clear, maybe, that people liking the American version of The Office is pathological, and that instead you should watch Fleabag and weep for hours. It's the priest who's both a real human and a person you want to fuck, and also someone with the power to forgive, who can see that you're doing something weird by addressing the camera, and can, with a lot of effort on your own part, get you to push the camera away and eventually say goodbye to it. And then, from there, behave as if you're in a non-self-conscious piece of art, a piece of art that isn't meta, i.e., so that you aren't even in art, you're just in the world. The show ends. I feel jealous that the screen can break it down like that, since poetry doesn't work that way, and instead all we can do here is address the audience. When I was jogging upstate, listening to Judy Sill and looking over the Hudson at the Catskill Mountains at sunset, at the rays of light peering through the clouds up by the mountaintops, it occurred to me that maybe all of religion, or at least Judeo-Christian religion, is a really elaborate metaphor about mountains and perspective, which seemed embarrassingly silly. Like, really, all this because people were like, whoa, mountains. I can see so much from up here. Someone must be up even higher. And when I'm in the valley, light comes through seemingly in proximity to the mountains. Galaxy brain, God is the thing that can see it all at once. It's the notion that for better or worse, someone has a ledger. That things aren't in fact moment by moment and continually washed away. That instead everyone is held to account, and somewhere will be happy on account of the good things we did earlier. And elsewhere, Jeff Bezos, say, and his peers will have their blood spilt eternally. Even if all of this happens only in some abstract way, just from someone looking down from just above the summit of a mountain for a really long time. Which I guess would be some comfort. Someone, I guess, would watch the dog in David Berman's poem, watch him hear the speaker call him. But it already doesn't work. If God is about mountaintops, God still doesn't have access to the full range of sensory and psychic experiences of the world. Maybe someone watches this with the ledger, but the ledger doesn't record much. Instead, you've got to write the poem. David Berman writes the poem about the dog running in a field and hearing his name. For a single moment, my voice is everything, self-portrait at 28. But the dog calls back, spiking the camera. If David Berman is the cameraman, and I am putting myself in David Berman's shoes. You fill the dog's head and the dog fills yours. The reader overhears it. God looks down from a mountaintop and likes what he sees, his vision obscured by nothing but the dog's furry head, and your head, also furry. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marie. I have spent so much time with this book. It really means so much to me, and it was just such a pleasure and joy to get to hear you read from it tonight. And everyone who doesn't already have a copy, be like Serena and be sure to get one. It's just brilliant. And thank you all again so much for being here. We'd love to see you at the Poetry Project again soon. Next week, we have an amazing reading on Wednesday with Arissa White in conversation with Ross Gay. On Thursday, there's Layli Long Soldiers coming to give a lecture on failure. So a lot of really, really exciting stuff. We would love to see you back. Thank you so much for being here. We'll put some music on. Feel free to hang out for a little bit, say, your praise in the chat. And thank you so much. Take good care. Thank you so much again, Marie, Serena, and Farnoosh. This was a wonderful, wonderful night. Thank you.